At just before dawn, while most American cities were still quiet, federal teams moved at the exact moment across several states, breaking down doors, flooding stairwells, and pulling suspects out of places that had looked ordinary only hours earlier. Apartments, garages, and small office spaces turned into arrest scenes as handcuffs clicked shut and agents stacked bags of drugs, cash, and weapons on the floor. There were no warning shots and no public announcements, only fast entries and controlled force, because this was not a random bust, but a planned strike aimed at something much larger. What surfaced in those early hours was only a thin layer of a system that had learned how to hide inside everyday business routines and trusted neighborhoods. Subscribe to Military Power to follow these silent front lines, because what was exposed before sunrise suggests a deeper fight still unfolding across the United States. The traffic stop unfolded on a broad Texas highway where refrigerated trucks move every hour, and nothing about this one appeared unusual as it rolled past under steady daylight. The trailer was clean, the plates were current, and the paperwork matched the load, showing fresh produce bound for distribution points farther north. This is why the initial stop followed standard procedure rather than a heightened alert. Troopers positioned their vehicles carefully, controlled the scene, and guided the driver to the shoulder, where engines idled and passing traffic continued without slowing. This was the type of inspection that happens countless times across the state, yet the setting carried quiet tension because routine stops often reveal more than they promise. The driver remained cooperative, with hands visible and a steady posture, while officers moved with calm discipline around the truck. The inspection shifted when a K-9 unit entered the scene and began its slow, methodical walk around the trailer, its nose close to the metal seams and door edges. The dog paused near the rear axle, sat down, and held position, signaling the presence of narcotics with trained precision rather than excitement. Officers exchanged brief looks and moved without hesitation because the alert demanded further action even when nothing appeared wrong to the naked eye. Doors were opened and crates of vegetables were examined, revealing only clean packaging and chilled air flowing from the refrigeration unit. The absence of visible contraband did not reduce the alert, because trained dogs react to scent rather than surface appearance. A technical inspection followed, with portable scanning equipment brought to the trailer and passed slowly along the floor and side panels. The readings showed irregular density beneath the cargo space, a subtle but unmistakable anomaly that suggested structural modification rather than natural variation. Officers removed pallets with care, keeping the load intact while exposing sections of the metal flooring. Tools were applied with controlled force, lifting panels piece by piece as traffic noise blended with the scrape of steel. Beneath the surface, a hidden compartment emerged, meticulously engineered and sealed to evade detection during routine checks. Inside the concealed space were tightly wrapped packages stacked with exact spacing, each one identical in size and shape, indicating industrial-level preparation rather than improvised concealment. Field tests confirmed the contents as methamphetamine, processed to high purity, and packaged for long-distance transport rather than local sale. The volume was significant, measured in dozens of kilograms rather than small quantities, and its placement beneath fresh produce revealed deliberate planning. This was not a careless smuggling attempt or a desperate act by an individual driver. The compartment design and load scale pointed toward organized logistics and repeated use. Officers secured the scene and placed the driver under arrest, maintaining professional distance and control throughout. The driver showed fear rather than aggression, and questioning revealed confusion rather than confidence, suggesting limited knowledge of the cargo beneath the floor. This reaction reinforced a critical realization for investigators, because experienced traffickers often display rehearsed behavior under pressure. The contrast between the calm paperwork and the sophisticated concealment exposed a deeper problem than one intercepted truck. The stop marked the first visible crack in a system that had been operating quietly across major highways. This discovery triggered immediate communication with federal agencies because the method and scale exceeded the scope of local enforcement. Data from the truck was preserved, including routing information, maintenance records, and digital tracking logs. Analysts began comparing these details with existing intelligence on cross-state trafficking routes and suspicious freight movements. Patterns emerged quickly, linking this truck to a larger fleet operating under a recognized corporate name. What began as a routine roadside action shifted into the opening move of a much larger investigation. The company identified through shipping records was Southwest Logistics, a long-established trucking firm with a clean regulatory history and widespread commercial reach. Publicly, it operated as a standard freight carrier, employing hundreds of drivers and maintaining contracts with major retail distribution networks. Its trucks moved produce, packaged goods, and refrigerated cargo across the country without drawing attention. Regulatory inspections showed compliance, and its safety rating reflected years of routine operation. On paper, the company represented reliability and efficiency within the American supply chain. Federal investigators approached the company cautiously because dismantling a legitimate business requires clear evidence rather than suspicion. Financial audits, fleet tracking data, and internal maintenance schedules were reviewed in detail, revealing discrepancies that aligned with the Texas traffic stop. Particular trucks exhibited unusual service intervals and non-standard modifications that were not documented in standard repair logs. These vehicles followed routes that matched known drug distribution corridors rather than typical commercial demand. The evidence suggested intentional design rather than accidental oversight. Further investigation revealed that Southwest Logistics was not a victim of infiltration by outside criminals. It was controlled from within by cartel interests that had built the company specifically to serve their needs. The business structure allowed illegal shipments to be transported alongside legitimate cargo, thereby masking criminal activity behind legitimate commerce. Contracts with major retailers provided cover, ensuring constant movement and reduced scrutiny. This arrangement transformed trust into a vulnerability, allowing criminal operations to operate inside the framework of everyday commerce. The fleet itself was divided into two distinct categories, with most trucks operating legitimately and a smaller group assigned to high-risk transport. These priority vehicles received specialized modifications at select facilities, where technicians installed hydraulic flooring systems and concealed compartments designed to bypass standard inspection tools. The modifications were clean and precise, blending seamlessly into the trailer structure. Climate control systems were adjusted to preserve both produce and narcotics, ensuring the cargo survived long journeys. This level of engineering reflected long-term planning and significant investment. Drivers were also separated by function, with many unaware of the hidden compartments beneath their loads. Others received coded instructions and compensation for following specific routes and schedules. Communication systems avoided direct references to illegal cargo, instead relying on timing and location cues. The result was a network that moved methamphetamine across the country while appearing to deliver food and household goods. American highways became logistical corridors for cartel operations, and the food supply chain inadvertently became a delivery mechanism. The significance of the Texas stop extended far beyond the seized drugs because it exposed the mechanics of a system rather than a single crime. Investigators recognized that every intercepted shipment represented countless others that had already passed through. The concealment method showed adaptability and confidence, traits that only develop through repeated success. This realization shifted the investigation toward dismantling the entire structure rather than targeting individual drivers. The priority became understanding how the company functioned as a criminal enterprise. The operation that followed focused on mapping routes, identifying modified vehicles, and tracking communication patterns within the organization. Surveillance expanded quietly, avoiding premature action that could alert those at the top. Every mile driven by a priority truck added to the intelligence picture, revealing the scale of the operation. The Texas traffic stop remained central because it provided physical proof that connected paperwork, engineering, and narcotics into a single system. It marked the moment when routine enforcement uncovered industrial-level crime. Before moving deeper into the investigation, readers are invited to consider the broader implications of this discovery, because one intercepted truck raises questions that extend far beyond a single highway. How many similar shipments traveled unnoticed before this moment, and how deeply embedded had the system become within trusted commercial networks? Share your thoughts and add your voice, because understanding the scale of what slipped through matters as much as recognizing what was finally stopped. As investigators continued to trace the connections exposed by this stop, attention began to shift away from the roadside and toward the corporate structure that made such concealment possible, setting the stage for the next phase of the operation. Federal tracking began quietly and without movement on the ground, as agents focused on screens rather than doors, watching dots slide across digital maps that stretched from Texas to the Midwest and up toward the East Coast. Each truck in the fleet transmitted location data every few seconds, and when these signals were layered together, patterns started to form that no single traffic stop could reveal. Some vehicles followed predictable commercial routes, stopping at rest areas, distribution centers, and fuel stations in regular rhythm. Others moved with different timing, different stops, and different pauses that did not match standard delivery behavior. These differences allowed investigators to distinguish between routine operations and something far more deliberate. As the data increased, agents began categorizing drivers into distinct groups based on their movement, communication, and observed behavior. Many drivers followed assigned routes without deviation, showed no unusual contacts, and interacted only with dispatch in routine ways. These individuals moved freight as instructed and remained unaware of what lay beneath the cargo floor. A smaller group behaved differently, adjusting routes on short notice, stopping at locations not listed on delivery plans, and responding to coded instructions sent through indirect channels. These drivers received extra payments and accepted silent rules that required them to look away during loading and unloading. Attention then shifted from the drivers to the people giving the orders, because patterns of movement pointed back to fixed points rather than random choices. GPS data revealed repeated visits to the same maintenance yards and secondary garages that were not listed in official company documents. Surveillance teams positioned themselves near these locations, watching as trucks arrived empty and left heavier, their suspension lower and handling altered. Inside these facilities, mechanics worked with specialized tools and custom parts, installing hidden compartments and hydraulic systems designed for concealment rather than repair. These were not ordinary garages but production sites for smuggling equipment. Parallel to this groundwork, financial analysts traced payments flowing through layers of accounts connected to company leadership. Executives approved maintenance costs that far exceeded standard repairs and signed off on equipment purchases unrelated to legal hauling. Communication records tied these decisions to shipment schedules, linking boardroom choices to movements on the highway. The leadership structure emerged clearly, with decision-makers directing both legal and illegal operations through the same chain of command. This clarity allowed agents to view the organization as a single network rather than a collection of scattered crimes. Once the map was complete, the operation shifted from observation to preparation, and timing became the critical factor. Agents knew that acting too early would scatter evidence and allow key figures to disappear. Acting too late would enable more shipments to pass through. The solution was a coordinated strike designed to target every level of the network simultaneously. Planning rooms filled with maps, timelines, and checklists as federal agencies aligned their roles and responsibilities. Each team received precise instructions and strict schedules to prevent leaks or delays. The chosen moment came before dawn, when highways were active enough to intercept moving trucks, but offices and garages remained vulnerable. At the signal, units across multiple states moved simultaneously, creating controlled chaos that the organization could not escape. On highways, marked and unmarked vehicles closed in on priority trucks, forcing them to the shoulder under controlled conditions. Drivers were removed from cabs, secured quickly, and separated from communication devices before they could alert others. Inspection teams moved immediately to the trailers, opening floors and revealing concealed compartments on the roadside. At corporate offices, entry teams breached doors and flooded hallways before staff could react. Executives were detained at their desks as agents seized computers, phones, and storage devices that held years of operational data. In garages, mechanics were taken into custody while tools still lay on workbenches, and partially modified trailers sat open under bright lights. The speed of the operation prevented coordination among those targeted, isolating each element of the network. This was not a chase, but a closing net. As the hours passed, the scale of the takedown became clear through numbers that reflected years of hidden activity. Across the country, agents secured approximately 52 tons of methamphetamine that had been staged for distribution or mid-transport. 250 trucks were seized, including both modified trailers and standard vehicles used as cover. Arrests were made of 273 individuals, ranging from executives and coordinators to mechanics and drivers who knowingly participated. These figures represented more than a single bust because they captured the full operational capacity of the network. To understand the impact, agents compared the volume seized to street-level distribution. The amount of meth recovered equaled millions of individual doses, enough to supply entire urban regions for extended periods. Each truck represented a mobile storage unit capable of crossing state lines without drawing attention to itself. Removing these assets from circulation disrupted supply chains that extended far beyond one region. The organization did not lose a shipment, but lost its ability to function. Equally important was the effect of simultaneous arrests, which prevented the leadership from reorganizing or shifting tactics. Without executives to give orders, mechanics to build compartments, and drivers to move loads, the system began to collapse inward. Communication channels fell silent as devices were confiscated and accounts frozen. The network that once moved freely across highways was reduced to static evidence stored in federal warehouses. This level of disruption required precision and restraint rather than brute force. The arrests also clarified responsibility within the organization, separating those who acted knowingly from those misled by employment and routine. While hundreds were detained during the operation, investigators quickly identified drivers whose data showed no involvement beyond assigned routes. These individuals were released after verification, while priority drivers and supervisors faced formal charges. This distinction reinforced the focus on organized crime rather than indiscriminate punishment. The objective remained dismantling the system, not creating collateral damage. As the dust settled, the numbers told a clear story of structural destruction rather than temporary loss. 52 tons of meth represented years of planning and investment, now removed in a single coordinated action. 250 trucks represented the physical backbone of the operation, now seized and stripped of purpose. 273 arrests removed every layer of control, from strategic leadership to tactical execution. Together, these figures marked the end of a functioning criminal enterprise. This phase of the operation closed the circle that began with quiet tracking and ended with synchronized arrests, but it also opened the door to more profound consequences. With the network immobilized, attention now turns toward the legal and financial aftermath that will determine whether this system remains broken or attempts to rise again. Not every arrest that morning ended with handcuffs tightening around a guilty person. On several highways and loading zones, drivers stood beside their trucks, while agents checked records, scanned floors, and opened sealed compartments with practiced speed. Some drivers watched in shock as hidden spaces were exposed beneath cargo they believed was ordinary, their faces showing fear rather than calculation. These moments mattered because they revealed a clear line between organized crime and ordinary labor. The operation did not treat every driver as an enemy, and that choice shaped what followed. Investigators moved methodically, separating people as carefully as they separated evidence. Drivers were questioned on the roadside, inside temporary command tents, and later in secure facilities where digital records were reviewed in detail. Phone data, route history, and payment logs were compared against the movement patterns already mapped during the investigation. Many drivers showed no signs of coded messages, off-route stops, or unexplained bonuses. Their work history reflected regular schedules and lawful deliveries, not participation in a criminal plan. These drivers were released after verification, sometimes within hours, sometimes after longer checks, but always with clear documentation of innocence. Agents returned licenses, personal items, and paperwork while explaining what had been hidden beneath their trailers. The relief was visible, yet it was mixed with anger and disbelief. People who had trusted their employer now understood they had been used as shields for a cartel operation. They had driven across states, unaware that they were sitting above concealed narcotics. This distinction was central to the operation, because federal teams made a deliberate effort to protect workers who were never meant to be part of the crime. The focus stayed fixed on organized leadership, technical specialists, and drivers who knowingly accepted illegal roles. Priority drivers were identified separately based on their communication habits and route deviations. Mechanics who built hidden compartments were detained at work sites, still surrounded by tools and altered trailers. Executives were taken from offices where decisions had been signed and budgets approved. The message from enforcement was clear and consistent. This was a fight against cartel control, not against American labor. By drawing that line in public and in court filings, agencies reinforced trust in the process. The war targeted systems that exploited legitimacy, not the people whose paychecks depended on honest work. This clarity strengthened the case and removed any claim that the operation was indiscriminate or rushed. With the innocent separated from the guilty, attention shifted entirely toward dismantling the organization itself. Prosecutors prepared charges that treated the company as a criminal body rather than a collection of bad employees. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act became the primary weapon, allowing the entire structure to be charged as a single enterprise. This approach directly connected boardroom decisions to the movement of narcotics on the highway. Court proceedings moved quickly once indictments were filed. Evidence presented showed how legitimate revenue supported illegal transport and how executives approved costs tied to concealed compartments. Judges viewed the company's clean public image as an aggravating factor, not a defense. Sentences reflected the scale of harm, with senior leadership receiving life terms that removed any chance of return to the industry. The punishment matched the betrayal of public trust. Asset seizures followed with equal force. Trucks were confiscated, garages were shut down, and corporate accounts were frozen. Logos were stripped from vehicles before auction, and properties were transferred under federal control. Southwest Logistics did not enter a quiet bankruptcy. It was erased, its name removed from contracts and registries nationwide. The company vanished from American highways as entirely as if it had never existed. As this chapter closed, the operation left two lasting truths behind. Workers who had been misled were cleared and released, while those who built and directed the system were removed permanently. With the cartel structure dismantled and its cover blown, the focus now turns to how the justice system will prevent similar enterprises from resurfacing. This final separation between innocence and guilt sets the ground for examining how law and punishment will shape what comes next, as courts and policies decide whether silence returns or vigilance remains across the nation today. What began as a single traffic stop on a Texas highway has now closed a much larger chapter in the quiet war being fought inside the United States. One truck, one hidden compartment, and one alert K9 exposed a system that had learned how to move freely through the country without raising alarms. From that small moment on the roadside, investigators followed trails of paperwork, routes, and modified vehicles until the whole shape of a logistics empire controlled by a cartel came into view. What collapsed was not just a shipment, but an entire structure that had blended crime into everyday commerce for years. The fall of this operation shows how modern drug wars no longer look like street shootouts or border gunfights. There were no long chases on city streets and no exchange of fire in open view. Instead, the conflict played out through freight schedules, maintenance logs, and quiet movements across interstate highways. Trucks became weapons, warehouses became staging points, and contracts became shields. The battlefield was not a neighborhood corner, but the supply chain that feeds and stocks the nation every day. This case also underlines how power now hides behind legitimacy. The cartel did not rely solely on secrecy, but also on trust. It relied on clean records, legal cargo, and respected business names to move poison across state lines. By the time the system was fully exposed, it had already demonstrated how deeply criminal networks can infiltrate everyday life. That reality forces a more complicated truth into view. Stopping one operation does not mean the threat has ended, because the methods that allowed it to survive are still part of the modern economy. At the same time, the operation sends a clear message about enforcement. When agencies act with patience and coordination, they can dismantle systems that appear untouchable. The response was neither loud nor chaotic, but somewhat controlled and precise, targeting leadership, infrastructure, and logistics simultaneously. That approach removed the ability to adapt or escape, rendering a sprawling network static and unchanging. If you want to continue following these silent battles, where highways replace front lines and paperwork replaces weapons, subscribe to Military Power. These are the stories that rarely make headlines, yet shape the security of everyday life. In your view, do strikes like this truly restore order? Or do they only reveal a deeper system that remains hidden and waiting to be uncovered?